Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about some of my favorite classic books. These classics genuinely change the way I think about things and see the world, so I thought I'd go on here and talk about them. So first I want to talk about Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. So this is the only Steinbeck book that I've read so far, and I really loved it, so I'm excited to jump into East of Eden next. This book takes place during the Great Depression, and it follows these two buddies. They're workers. They're trying to find work and live the American dream. And they end up coming across this opportunity to work, but it doesn't really end up the way they expected. It's very simple and short. It's only about 100 pages. You can read it in one sitting, but it really hits hard, especially the ending. The ending is very emotional. It really puts the reality of the Great Depression and the effects it had on everyday people into perspective, and it taught me a lot about that time period. It's a great book about the American dream, loneliness, innocence, and it really affected me emotionally when I first read it. There is a reason why they teach this in schools. I never read this in school growing up, which was kind of surprising, but I wish I did because it is a great little book. Next up, we got a pretty big one. That is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. This is the very first Dostoevsky book that I've ever read, and it is also the book that made me fall in love with Russian literature. I would say you could argue this is one of the most psychologically immersive books that anyone has ever written. It's crazy. So this book follows a man named Raskolnikov, and at the beginning of the book, he commits a pretty horrific crime. And it happens right at the beginning, and then for the rest of the novel, we are watching him deal with the mental punishment of the crime he's committed. We see him navigate through all these different stages of emotions, and it is very fascinating to read about. This book does a great job of making you feel immersed. It doesn't just describe the guilt and the emotions that he's feeling. You feel like you are really put inside of the story. Throughout the book, he argues a lot with himself and his own thoughts, and you feel like you are kind of stuck in his head with him, watching these arguments play out. We see him experience panic, and he wants to confess to what he did, or he feels regret, all these different things. And as you read it, you just watch reality press in further and further for him. And it's so interesting. And I feel like Raskolnikov is such a fascinating character because he's not what you would typically imagine when you think of a criminal. And this isn't really, I wouldn't say it's an action-packed book. At the very beginning, you get like that peak of action, but then the majority of the book is just this internal battle that he's facing within himself. This book was kind of life-changing for me because it shows how we can lie to ourselves sometimes. It kind of shows us that people don't just do evil things because they're evil, but they will usually do them because they feel like it's justified in their mind and they're making the right decision. And in the book, we see all these different excuses that Raskolnikov is making for himself to try to make himself feel better. And it's crazy because the way Dostoevsky writes this, it's convincing, you know, and that's kind of the most disturbing part. You feel a lot of sympathy for him because you're really in his head and you can feel the emotions he's feeling. It's crazy. This is just an insane book, and I'd recommend it if this sounds interesting to you. I would say that, in my opinion, this is the most entertaining Dostoevsky book I've read so far, and I found it to be a lot more easy to read and understandable than I was initially expecting. Next, we have The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. And I know I already talked about this in my last video, so I won't spend too much time on it here, but this story is just so amazing. There's a couple of different storylines in this book, but the main one follows the devil as he comes down into Soviet Moscow with a group of his friends. This book is super unique because it's honestly really funny and weird, but it uses this comedy as a way to critique society, so it's a lot deeper of a book than you might think at first glance. I really loved the writing in this book. It uses a lot of magical realism in a really good way. There's all sorts of crazy characters and crazy things that can happen. There's a giant talking cat and people are flying through the sky on a broomstick, and it's just crazy. But it's also this love story. It's just, there's so much going on. It's very chaotic, but in the best way. But yeah, the magical parts of the story are very chaotic. They seem out of place and unexpected, but I don't know, there's just something about it that really resonated with me. There's so many jaw-dropping moments when you're reading it and you're just like, what is even happening? But he uses this magical realism to critique his society in kind of this indirect way, which makes sense because this was written during the Soviet Union, during a time where everything was heavily censored. And I'm pretty sure a very heavily censored version of this book was published while he was alive, but the full book wasn't actually published till after he passed away. And I don't know for sure if this is true, but I read somewhere that when he was writing this book, he was blind and paralyzed and going through a lot. People think that that's why this kind of reads like a fever dream. But yeah, this totally changed the way that I look at magical realism, and it made me want to read a lot more of it in the future. The next book I want to talk about is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. I lost the dust cover for this, so it's just a black book, but it's kind of fitting, honestly. This is a Japanese modern classic, and I think it might be the most sad, depressing book I've read in my entire life. But I really did get a lot out of it. It kind of showed me how complex our minds really can be, kind of like with Crime and Punishment. It reads kind of like a journal or some sort of confession, and we follow this very troubled man that believes that there's something very wrong with him. He doesn't fit in with society. He's kind of an outcast, and he feels like everybody is faking who they really are. So the book follows him as he puts on this kind of performance or fake persona to appeal to everybody else around him. But the longer he does this, the less real he feels inside. And we just watch as he starts to self-sabotage and his mental illness just gets worse and worse. A lot of people feel like this is kind of an autobiography because Dazai struggled with a lot of mental illness during his life. And I've also heard that he was very outgoing and friendly and kind of witty, which is pretty similar to the character in the book. So that's pretty fascinating. But yeah, this is a very dark book, but it kind of made me realize the different ways I might have been acting fake to appeal to other people in my life. This book is definitely a page turner despite how sad it is, and it's pretty short. I think I read it in just a couple of days. So I would definitely recommend it if this sounds interesting to you, but beware. Make sure you're in the right mental space before reading it because it is very heavy. Next up, we have The Stranger by Albert Camus. I first read this book a couple of years ago, and I really liked it. It follows this man that lives a seemingly ordinary life until one day he decides he's going to commit a very violent crime that was kind of out of nowhere. And after he does this, he just refuses to show any sign of regret or remorse, and society really hates him for doing that. He just doesn't want to pretend like he cares, like people want him to care. So I feel like this book isn't really about the crime he commits, and it's more about what happens when someone just doesn't care to lie to fit in with the world. When I first read this book a few years ago, I didn't think too much of it. I liked the story, but I didn't fully grasp it. But then earlier this year, I read The Myth of Sisyphus, and I feel like learning more about Camus' philosophy really helped me understand what he was trying to say with this. So honestly, I might recommend you read this before this. I mean, whatever you want, honestly, but this book will make you sit down and think for a really long time, and I really like that about it. The next book is another one I already talked about in my last video, but I just had to bring it up again, and that is Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. I would probably say this is my favorite book that I read last year. I really got a lot out of it. This book follows this young man that meets an older man named Sensei, and he really looks up to Sensei. So the first half of this book follows him as he's learning more about Sensei, and you really get to understand why he looks up to him. He finds Sensei to be very genuine in a way that he hasn't experienced before, and the book does a really good job of describing the shallowness he was used to and what really appeals to him about Sensei. And the whole second half of this book is just a letter that Sensei writes to this young man, and he talks about his own life, mistakes he's made, and events that happened that have shaped him into the man he is today. And it's here in the second half of the book where we start to see this side of Sensei that was kind of unexpected. And what I really got from this book is just how guilt can affect people, and it can shape people in a very quiet way. So we never really know what someone is carrying with them. Now, I don't really know if this book is for everyone. It is very, very slow paced. The writing is very simple, but I found it to be so refreshing. And personally, I liked how slow paced it was. I don't know, it just made me feel a type of way that I haven't really felt reading a book before. And I really like that. And I can't even really describe what that feeling is. It just felt very new, and it kind of ignited this spark for wanting to read more again. So yeah, those are some books that I really like. And yeah, a lot of them are really dark and kind of sad, but I feel like I personally got a lot out of them, so I thought I'd share them here. I would love to hear what types of videos you guys would want to see in the future from me. I think I'm going to start doing monthly book updates. I'm currently doing a slow read of War and Peace by Tolstoy, reading just one chapter a day. So maybe at the end of every month, I'll kind of do an update on that. And I'm also reading a few other books while I'm doing that slow read. I'm reading Stoner right now, and I'm really loving it, so I'm excited to talk about that. And I want to start East of Eden really soon. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any video idea suggestions. And thank you guys so much for watching. I just want to say thanks for all the love on the first video. I got so many good book recommendations and comments on there. I was very surprised to see how many people were interested in the last video I posted, so I want to keep making more. I know a lot of these books are fairly popular, but I tried to throw in a couple that I feel like aren't talked about too much. Maybe I'll do like criminally underrated books next or something. I would love to talk more about books. So anyways, thanks so much for watching to the end. I really appreciate it. See ya.